Wait a minute. We're live, but where's Audra? My name's Raymond Wiley. This is the Fourth Space, but I'm afraid Audra's sick tonight. She's been my co-host for so long. I need options. I'm going to freak out if I got to do this by myself. I can't just stand here like it's an episode of The Shadow of Ideas or something and just spout off by myself for 30 or 45 minutes. Nathan, can you bring Ian on with me? Oh, yeah. Oh, surprise.
I've heard that our good friend Audra, inimitable co-sovereign of the podcast, is feeling a bit fluish today. So I've been summoned early from the primordial umbra.
I like that. I like how you're the pestilence era fill-in. I'll take it.
When Nurgle strikes, I'm here to help.
That's it. Well, Ian, thanks for coming on and holding my hand a little bit on the live stream this week. You know, we've got a great guest coming on today, our friend Mark Tippets, who both of us have known for north of 20 years now. And
how dare you put a chronology to that and make me do that math? I will never forgive you for that. But yes, Tippets is a delight. One of my favorite people and legitimately one of the best huggers I've ever known in my life, I have to say. a wonderful, just a fantastic hugger.
You're bringing it in here, buddy, whether you like it or not, basically. And you're gonna love it. So Mark's had, like, of all my friends, you know, you always have these friends that have these like interesting, eclectic lives and biographies, and Mark's definitely one. And we're going to be talking a little bit today about some different subcultures that he's been a part of over the years. Nerd subculture back in the 80s, Neo-Pagan and occult subcultures in the South in the 90s and the early aughts. So we've got a lot on deck for you tonight. And, you know, Ian, thinking about some of our topics for tonight, one of them is going to be the Satanic Panic. Mark's going to have a lot to say about that. And it got me thinking about how, like, back in the town we grew up in, there was sort of a little brush with Satanic Panic.
Yeah, like I feel like we were just barely too young to catch the full brunt of like the nationwide Satanic Panic. But, you know, because again, we were sort of off in the country, in the exurbs. It took a little longer to get there, and there's a few people that maybe took it more seriously than most.
Oh my God, yes. And there's certain cultural sensationalism around the whole topic. So as I understand the story, and I pulled up some old AJC, Atlanta Journal-Constitution articles from the time. A kid at our high school, Ian, this was about 6 years before we were there. He snuck out into the woods during school, skipped school, and he went through the woods. And we've all done. I know me and you have done this. Walked through these same woods, skipped school under these same circumstances. But he may have taken it a little too far. He goes through the woods. This is near the Etowah River in Canton, right, Georgia, and gets out to this church that's back there. And I don't know if he was like a pyro, had some, you know, interest in fire or whatever, but the kid ends up becoming an arson and burning down the church. Right.
Yeah. Like based on the news articles I read, it looked like there might have even been a personal connection to something involved in it. But regardless, it was like 100-year-old church. And I mean, this thing was very rural and very, very small. Like, you know, I remember one of our first impressions walking by is like, oh, there was definitely some snake handling going on in that place.
Right. Yes. And so this was like, I don't know if it was a primitive Baptist church or just an old Southern Baptist church, whatever it was. But the kid ends up burning it down. And the whole story takes on this element of the Satanic Panic. And this is going to surprise you. Not because the people accuse the kid burning the church down of being like a Satanist and having sort of like an anti-Christian motive or whatever. No. When the kid was asked why he burned the church down, I assume, excuse that he came up with in the moment was, well, it was, everyone knew that there were Satanists at this church. So,
which is so shocking to me, because that was literally a rumor that was still like the only reason we were familiar with that building when we were in high school is like, man, there's some strange things going on. I heard there's been rituals done at that place.
Right.
So,
right. And that's all the institutional memory you get in between 6 years of high school students. Like, that's as much as we knew. It's like, oh, well, there was some like vaguely occult thing about this place. And I remember, Ian, the day after we saw the Blair Witch Project at the movie theater, we went back there and walked to the woods. How could we not? But we didn't burn anything down, and we didn't blame it. We didn't blame it on Satanists. So,
well, that's where you went wrong.
Apparently. So, I thought that might just sort of give the audience today like a good little starting window into the world of weird crap in the southeastern part of the United States back in the 80s and 90s, because it was a very different world than it is now.
Yeah, especially in our little neck of the woods, where it really was this clash of analog, digital, rural, and urban coming into this exurb to suburb transition. Like, it was such a strange place where we were growing up, and this whole metro area. But again, if there's one individual I can think of who's gotten a big full slice of both in our area and in other areas, I'm sure he's going to tell us about.
Oh yeah,
it's got to be our boy Mark Tippets.
That's right, Nathan. If you could bring Mark on. Mark, my friend, let's put you in the middle. Let's put him in here. I'm gonna put him in the middle. Yeah. There we go. Isn't it comfortable and warm there?
I want to be the rye bread on this Mark Rubin.
Hold me.
That's
Mom.
right. That's right. We're here. We're your friends. Mark, it's so good to have you on the show. I mean, I'm going back 20 years in my podcasting career, and I'm looking back at some episodes, and there you are. We're talking about Kabbalah on Out There Radio for like 2 hours. How does it feel to be back on the air with us, bud?
Nonplussed. I think that's the word.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
Well, I'm plussed to see you.
I was saying before in the green room, the last time I was on one of your shows, it was really life transforming for me. So because of that interview, I got in touch with my father's side of my family, who I had been estranged from my entire life. So if this turns out to be half as impactful as that, then I expect amazing things to happen.
Here's hoping we find that long lost billionaire uncle. Yeah.
No, I know.
That's right. That's right. No, Ian Mark literally found a lost family member, a brother that he never knew. The last time we were on there.
Several.
So, yep.
And more aunts and uncles and nieces, and I can't even count them.
So, Mark, we have some interesting things in common going all the way back. So when I was a child, I lived pretty close to the city of Atlanta, near the Atlanta airport. And I went to a small Episcopal elementary school. It had about 100, 150 students in it. And we were, in many ways, a feeder school for a lot of the local prep schools in the area. The most significant of those being just a few blocks over, literally about 10 blocks down the street from where I lived. It was called Woodward. And it had originally been the Georgia Military Academy. And vibes.
Depending on the time frame of that founding, that could have a lot of implications.
Exactly.
Taught us how to march in PE. That was.
My grandma was the crossing guard there. So I'd end up seeing the prep school kids getting out of school sometimes in their suits and stuff. And apparently, Mark, you were one of these. What was it like? I mean, look, we've talked about this common experience on the show of being an outsider.
Yeah.
What was it like?
It was awful for me. So I'll tell you about this this experience. So I had a choice between Woodward and Paideia. And I've learned that I have terrible judgment and have made a lot of terrible life choices. And that might have been the worst of the lot. So when I first came to Atlanta, I was kind of I was in third grade. I was in the middle of a school year, and they just dumped me into the public school closest to where we were living. And it was a disaster, because it was like the last days of the old South, and all of the white kids hated me because I was a New York Yankee carpetbagger Jew. And the black kids wouldn't talk to me because the white kids hated me, and they didn't want to get beat up for talking to me, and they couldn't fight back because then their parents would get fired. And it was a whole, like, that was my introduction to Southern racism, was why the black kids couldn't talk to me, and why the white kids hated me. And so like I was living in downtown Decatur, and I look at that place now, and it's like this center of bohemian multiculturalism, and there are all these wonderful immigrant communities that have, like, the more that whole black-white dynamic of the old South gets broken up, the happier I am. So I just,
amen.
Like, downtown Decatur to me is just a feast of Schadenfreude about the, what became of the Klan-dominated old boys world that I moved into. But
I could just stand in the parking lot of your DeKalb farmers market, looking at all the people walking in, and like
exactly
again the quilt of cultures, and just
right on. And that is very much Decatur today. But
so we have a sort of advantage of gentrification now, but back then not so much. How could you find a way to be happy in an environment
I didn't. That? But my mom knew immediately that we at least had to get me out of there. And so she found this weird little place called Roger Ashcombe Academy that was like literally the entrance exam was an IQ test. Like, it was a school for unstable geniuses. And I fit right in there. We had electives that were like, I had a Dungeons and Dragons class. My mom wound up teaching there, and taught a class she called it values clarification, but it was like she was teaching transactional analysis and Gestalt therapy to like fourth graders. And so that was, you were asking, like, how did I get turned on to nerd culture? It was very much originally my mom. She was a nerd. And so it was just like so many things. When I was an autistic little kid and I was having trouble learning to read, she would like leave copies of Asimov's science fiction magazine lying around at strategic points, and I would see the rocket ship and be like, ooh, I have to find out what that's about. And so I kind of jumped straight from like C-Spot Run to Heinlein and H.P. Lovecraft, and like no in between there. And my mom was also, she was a lesbian goddess worshiper. Like I come from this, my mom's side of my family, Jews who were like very old American German Jewish family that had mostly assimilated, kind of discovered, or not discovered, but people generally think of Jews as white people, and that was something of an accomplishment for Jews in the 19th century. It was a real effort, and there was a lot that they gave up, a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of respectability, politics, and I saw when I got here, I saw a lot of parallels with the middle class Black culture that was so important to Atlanta, and really especially to the in-town Atlanta scene. But anyhow, so I went to this crazy school for crazy geniuses for a couple of years, and they went bankrupt because the parents were all quite clever too, and they figured out ways to avoid paying their bills. And So
this is what happens to every elite institution, as far as
it was not an elite institution. It was like meeting in the basement of some church that, you know, they rented the place during the week, and it was very kind of sketchy and fly by night, but and a lot of craziness, but also a lot of just like they had the guy who was the coach for the Olympic fencing team would come in, and like that was my PE class, was learning how to fence. And so it was, I mean, it was high weirdness. And then that closed, and we had to find a new place for me. And so I went and interviewed at Paideia, and like Paideia was very open and free. And so the kids there could be like, you know, cliquish and picking on the new kid. And so I was like, the kids there were mean to me. I don't want it. And then I went to Woodward, and like everybody was absolutely terrified of literally being beaten. Like, you know, the principals and deans.
There was still corporal punishment at that time, and some of those administrators were the old GMA administrators too.
I got a lot of that. Yeah. For like forgetting my tie, and just like my first girlfriend got into me because she thought I was some kind of wild rebel, edgy person, because I was constantly my freshman they had like senior superlatives, and they had like freshman sarcastic superlatives, and mine was most likely to be called to the principal's office. But it was all like forgetting my tie or being late for class, because I was often la la land. But
so you're not just a misfit in the world of the other students. Like it's hard to fit in even with the rules.
I was doomed to be. Yeah, I was a misfit among misfits. And then so like I found this wonderful nerd culture and hooked into more traditional kind of counterculture vibes at the same time. Got into the punk scene, but I also had this whole other. So for a while, I was very happily comfortable, just a typical nerd. But I had this other side of me, which is I'm a mystic, and I started having really powerful mystical experiences when I was around 15, 16. And then that drew me out of that community, and I started exploring different religious and spiritual traditions. And that, again, you know, it was like my mom had kind of done the same thing, and she had gotten into this feminist goddess worship scene. And so my explorations started there. And then I had some friends who got me into the occult kind of accidentally. And then through some very weird turns of event, I kind of rejected all of that bohemian weirdness that I had grown up with, and got very sort of, I didn't have a sense of who I was supposed to be or what the rules were supposed to be for me. I had grown up in such a iconoclastic counterculture society that I just didn't see at all where to fit. I wound up getting into ultra Orthodox Judaism because it was like, they'll tell you which shoe you should tie first. And like, you know, there are rules for everything. And that was very appealing to me, especially to my kind of autistic, I like rules. I like structure.
Yeah.
That was a lot of what appealed to me about D&D too. It was like, you know, I just
giving you that hyper structure without having to do military service.
Exactly. Well, yeah, let's take some of these.
Woodward was a bit of a disaster for me in terms of like, I was the most bullied kid in school by you know a fair margin, and the you know the teachers, like when I would appeal for help, they would be like, you should avoid walking alone, and like they were completely unhelpful. They were just
we forget how oppressive some of these supposedly elite atmospheres are.
Oppressive. And part of what saved me was you know that I found that community of fellow science fiction and fantasy people. Part of what saved me was that one of those people was the first girlfriend who thought that I was some kind of rebel weirdo, and
he's a man.
Like I left a notebook in gym class one day that got picked up by somebody, and then like had a bunch of love letters from her, and so I went from being the biggest geek in ninth grade to being like, suddenly everybody knew I was like probably the only freshman who was actually getting laid. And they just, it freaked everybody out so much, completely transformed the whole, everybody's attitude toward me. And so for a little while there, like I was catapulted into this weird kind of coolness that was completely, I didn't know what to do with or what to make of it. But it stopped.
What did you and people like you, the cohort you found, the friends you found that were kind of like you, what did you guys think was cool? What kind of things?
You've seen Stranger Things. I don't know if I have.
I wasn't trying to stereotype, and I wasn't 100% sure about the exact chronological overlap. But
yeah, it was absolutely. It was the first. So Raymond, you were very taken with my story about how I met Amy Carter. So
yeah,
so I'll tell you that. So that's a pretty good. So I'm walking down the hall one day, and I see this mousy girl who's sitting on the steps of just random hallway in the high school, and she's leafing through the rule book for some, like I immediately recognize it as the rule book for one of these there were all of these sort of zines and small gaming, like some of them were dice games and various tabletop role playing. Anyhow, this one was some kind of space themed, like you were racing toward being the first country to build a rocket, and I don't know, maybe something like Civilization, but as a tabletop role playing game. And so I just I see the game, and I'm like one of us, and just immediately sit down and start talking to her and like, tell me about this game, and then we become thick as thieves, and like she turns me on to Jimi Hendrix, and then turns me on to the Psychedelic Furs, and introduces me to the punk scene at Woodward, which is all of these kind of very intellectual people who were reading Derrida and what's his name, the situationist guy,
Lacan. Oh yeah.
And so I get into the hardcore punk scene and start like hanging out at Metroplex and 688, and eventually hanging out with Sharks, and like kind of got into early Antifa.
I'm sorry, I need to contradict your timeline there. I'm pretty sure both of my grandfathers were in early Antifa.
Well, okay.
Yeah, my grandfather was at D-Day +9. Putting tanks on that.
So there's real Antifa, and then there's the thing that like the right wing has latched onto as this is Antifa, which is something like it's a real thing, but it's something that grew out of the anti-Nazi skinhead counterculture of the punk scene. And
yeah, you mentioned Sharp, so that's Skinheads Against Racial Prejudice. Is that right? Am I getting that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So there were a handful of them, and I have stories about knife fights with Nazi skinheads. So, but
we're going to double check the statute on limitations before we go into those.
So
probably a good idea.
About 6 months after I start hanging out with Amy, she's introduced me to all of these. So she introduced me to the punks, and she also introduced me to the other people who wind up becoming this science fiction club that we formed in like 1985. And they really become like they saved my life, basically. They saved me from all of this violence and horror that is my day to day. Like I was literally, you know, getting knocked to the ground every day, and kicked, and just my memories of like the first year I was there are mostly of like circles of children gathered around me chanting "loser, loser," and it was not a healthy experience. But the other nerds really saved me from that, and then, you know, I had a click there, and that was great. And then one day I'm talking to one of my friends in this new clique, and I'm like, so anyhow, what's Amy's last name? And my friend is like, you don't know who Amy is? And so like I'm glad that I didn't, because I really hero worshipped her father, and like some of my earliest memories are of him running for president and being like, Mom, you should vote for that guy. He's cool. And
he's nice, and he's from here.
So I'm at Amy's graduation party, or like not the I guess the baccalaureate speeches, and her father is speaking but she doesn't want to be in with her dad speaking, because it's her dad and it's kind of embarrassing. So all of her friends are hanging around outside and exchanging gifts. They're all seniors except for me. And Amy looks at me and she's like, "Hey, Mark, you look like a vampire." And I'm like, "Oh, thanks, Amy." So she's like, "No, I mean that in a nice way." I'm like, "Oh, okay. You look like a blood-sucking demon from hell, but I mean it in a nice way." So she tells me about
like the sexy Tom Cruise way, not the Nosferatu
right, exactly.
way.
She tells me about Interview with the Vampire, which is kind of like an underground cult classic that like all the cool kids read and nobody else has ever heard of. And I had I had night terrors as a little kid. I had had to sleep with a light on and well into my teens. And so I went home and really thought about that one night. And I was like, what if I was one of the monsters in the dark? I wouldn't have to be afraid of the other, and so it became this kind of identity that I adopted as like a Jungian projection of coolness and a persona that I could take on. And
the new super ego is going to be so
edgy. So that it would have a few years later. So, but then I went off and became a religious fanatic and kind of got lost interest in all that.
Did you get to see some of the early conventions?
So yeah, okay. So there was this going on at high school, and then I mentioned I grew up around Emory Village, and one day my mom is like, so I saw this flyer, and Emory had this little convention that they called the DooleyCon that ran for a few years, and it was, at the time, there were a bunch of tiny little science fiction conventions popping up all over, and it was one of those. It was just probably a few dozen people took over one building for the weekend, and had, it was a science fiction convention. There were screenings of some old shows and some Dungeons and Dragons, and but there were a few people there who I had known from the School for Crazy Geniuses, and so I reconnected with those people, and they told me about that in this same building, like once a month, there was this Doctor Who fan club that met called Terminus Tardis, named after the original name of Atlanta. And so that became like, Doctor Who was already a big thing for me. It really became the center of my life. And I before anything else, I was a Doctor Who fan first and foremost.
So how old were you at this point?
This was 7th grade, 8th grade, somewhere.
Which Doctor would that even have been?
This is so I came in on the 5th Doctor.
Okay.
So that was the one who's the father of David Tennant's wife, who was mostly at that point famous for playing a character who stuck his hand up cows' asses a lot on a what was it called? All Creatures Great and Small, I think. He played this country doctor, and then suddenly he was Doctor Who. And
that's funny.
But,
so a Doctor Who
at the meetings, the Terminus Tardis meetings, we mostly watched Fourth Doctor episodes. So it was all the best classic Doctor Who. And
how could you even get Doctor Who in Atlanta?
Well, PBS had it on, and
okay.
And they showed it every Saturday night. And when they would have fundraising drives, we would go on the fundraising drives. So like, I don't know, somewhere there's documentary footage of me, like 14-year-old me, manning the phones for the PBS fundraising drives along with all of the other nerds. And I remember one night there was like a row of like 5 of us, and we were all connected by one scarf that one of my friends had knitted that got entirely out of hand. And so there was that group and the group at Woodward, and then the group at Woodward got connected with some people in Dunwoody who were doing some of the early BBS stuff. And so we got very hooked into the underground BBS scene. And I was not personally really into computers, but like I remember there was a Dixie Trek where a friend of mine was very enthusiastic about introducing me to the Mentor. And I was like, I don't know who that is and I don't care. But I met the Mentor one time. And
what, he like wrote the Hacker Manifesto or something like that, right?
Famous. But so
you were getting a copy of that off of a BBS.
So one of the things that I found very interesting about your first couple of episodes was you talking about what is the difference between a counterculture and a subculture.
Yeah.
And this idea that a counterculture is revolutionary, that it has some agenda that is opposed to mainstream society, as opposed to a subculture that's just niche marketing somehow, that's like has an alternative aesthetic.
That's certainly how we treat it now.
And nerd culture was very interesting because a lot of it kind of wove in and out, and it was both. And I think a great example of that is how later I got onto the internet. I was introduced by some friends from Dragon Con, which I'll get back to Dragon Con. But so a friend of mine that I had originally met at Dragon Con, like the year after I got back from, jumping ahead a lot, got back from seminary in Jerusalem. I told you I got into religion and I wandered far. And so I get back from seminary and I'm like reconnecting with this fan culture that I had grown up with. And this guy gives me my first shell account on a Unix system and a copy of Doom, which dooms me because I like.
Did you know that Jurassic Park is on a Unix system as well?
Everything is on a Unix system. But so the shell account. But it turned out all of my friends from high school were already on the same system and had shell accounts on it and had been on it since the 80s, since like 10 years earlier. And so the guy Georgia Tech started a company, like spun off a company to publish books, but like not regular books, but like heavily visual technical manuals. And the guy who ran their IT department was a furry. And now furries were one of
as they often are.
When you first got on the internet, it was all like very underground groups. So it was like there were furries and there were a lot of skinheads and there were a lot of Lubavitcher Hasidim and like very just not the people you would think would be early online. But like people who really saw the potential for far-flung, very marginal groups to organize and have community. And it was really, so this furry guy was like, had a mission in life to get all of the weirdest, most radical, fringiest people they knew. They were like, these are the people who need this technology the most. These are the people who need to be able to connect and network and like not leave it to the skinheads. And so so anyhow, eventually Georgia Tech wound up shutting down the whole company because the people that this furry got on there had like infiltrated the NSA one too many times. Like it just like this incredible hotbed of hackers and like it was a very successful project to get a bunch of militant weirdos. So there was a group in Atlanta in the early 80s that was called the Futurists. They were a spin-off of one of I think the group that organized Worldcon, that was like some of those classic Asimov and those other early hardcore science fiction writers founded this group. But by the time it got to Atlanta, it had turned into this really weirdo, degenerate alternative group. And so like my date to the high school prom was this Satanist chick who was in the Futurists and was she was like heavily into BDSM, and they were doing like really seriously weirdo swinger kink stuff as part of this whole underground BBS scene. And so like, then I got really into Rocky Horror through the conventions, and that was another. So I made this little list of like subcultures that I got into because of that. And it just goes on and on. And
as
like,
we just go skipping through them like a child through a construction site in an old cartoon.
I'm feeling a pretty tight Venn diagram.
Yeah, it really was.
You say this.
So one of the people that I met through, I don't even remember which, I think through the Terminus TARDIS, introduced me to this gaming group called Dagger, which was named after the guy who started the group. Had a Dagger computer, which was, I don't know, like some early like Commodore 64 equivalent system that they were running a BBS off of. And
about as much processing power as a TI-86.
So it was called the Dragon. That group of gamers and BBS people started Dragon Con. But when I met them, they were like meeting in the basement of a Chuck E. Cheese. And it was just like skip forward a long way, and looking back, the fact that the whole thing turned out to be very sketchy. It should have come as no surprise to anyone. But so it was very sketchy. But the thing about the scene in Atlanta, there were much bigger cities with much bigger established scenes, but they were much more, because there were more people, they could break off into their little niches. And so there were, and this was true of Atlanta early on somewhat. Like there was a Star Trek convention called Dixie Trek, and there was a like Tolkien and Middle Earth and Dungeons and Dragons convention called Fantasy Fair, and there were these different little niches for different little fandoms, and in larger cities that remained pretty much the case. In Atlanta, there weren't enough of any of these groups to really sustain a large thing. So we had to kind of confederate. And so the Doctor Who fans and the Star Trek fans and the Star Wars fans and the gamers and the anime people, like we all got together and formed this one big club. And I did not know this at the time. Like I wound up learning a lot about the way that markets work and business strategy. And what I came to understand much later was this was the beginning of a period of media consolidation on a massive scale. And that had a huge influence on the course of the development of fandom. So when I first got into it, it was a very niche and it was very small subcultures, and a lot of it, they really were countercultures. There were, these groups like the furries that were just reviled and demonized. And
I always wonder when that fulcrum point was where all of a sudden nerd culture, and again, I absolutely believe that it was mostly a purposefully commercialized maneuver where they find like, okay, like it's hit this critical mass of popular understanding and acceptance, time to turn the toy factories on and get these, X-Men action figures or whatever it might have been. A lot of times I like to think it was the Two Towers film that when it came out, like that was the crescendo of nerd culture kind of cresting the wave and hitting the populace at large. Like, what do you think on that?
So you're a finance major.
I don't know what you're talking about. Why would you dox me like that? Stop that.
It came up. I didn't like, if I knew, I didn't remember, but
yes,
it came up on that first episode. So I assume that means you went to business school.
Yes,
Don't know how much, like if you were into finance. I know a little about finance, like enough to like, I understand primary derivatives and I know what the secondary derivatives are, but don't ask me to explain them. But
no, I'm not pulling out
the much more interested in
equation right now. Stop that again.
In strategic management, and I don't know how much. Like, did you get like Michael Porter? Did you get that whole sort of framework of how the tiers of economies of scale work and how
to a certain degree, how to
works.
Leverage up your competitive advantages and all that good stuff.
Yeah, okay. So all of that as a framework, plus the very basic economic idea of like the engine of capitalism is price discovery, and the way that markets work efficiently is that kind of left to their own devices, they figure out what's in and what's cool and what people are willing to pay for. So I think that a lot of what happened was not intentional. It was price discovery. It was a period of let me draw a parallel with music. I think this is the easiest way to do this. So when I was a kid, like the hippies were the counterculture. And so counterculture music was, the Doors and Jimi Hendrix and classic stuff. And all the folk people that my mom was into, Phil Oakes and Bob Dylan and Joan Baez, and like that was the counterculture musically. And then you skip ahead to like the Gen X stuff, and there's all this. Oh, so there's post-punk, but before there's post-punk, there's punk. So the hippies are a counterculture. They are specifically like it's the anti-war movement, and it's we're going to get rid of this whole structure of capitalist civilization and hug each other and live in flowers and the punks come along as a rebellion against that, and they're all like, that's BS, and we're never going to see that dream realized, and the whole idea of music as counterculture, as a revolutionary force is naive BS, and we're just going to like become heroin addicts and die on the floor of the Chelsea Hotel. So that's
as one does.
That's our plan for
the style of the times.
Right. But they're specifically, they're still, that whole anarchist agenda is like a rejection of the whole idea that you can reform society, that there's some better way. But it's still, it's still very overtly political and has an ideology. It's a nihilistic ideology, but it's there. It exists. Then the post-punk, like the goth scene comes along, and it's a rejection of the rejection, and it's just like purely aesthetic. It takes from goth, and from a lot of the the early influence on the goth scene is like
it's romantic.
Well, but it's it's the stuff that what's her name, Vivian, the woman who ran Sex in London, where like the Sex Pistols and Susie and the Banshees and all these different bands like got together over Malcolm McDowell and Vivian. Somebody should know this. Vivian something. It's escaping.
Yeah.
She like invented punk or the goth look as it started out as a punk thing, and then but the goths were like, we're just going to go back to that part, like the fashion end of it, and do that. And much later there was a recapitulation of that same sort of process in the Neo-Pagan community. I know, Raymond, you were interested in like how did they wind up becoming burners, and it was very much sort of the same. Like when my mom got into goddess worship, it was all like this theological revolutionary thing of like, they were going to undo the hierarchy by dismantling the foundations of patriarchal religion and dethroning the Uber Daddy, and then it got into really kind of like the craft sort of took over people's impressions of things, and it became this like increasingly cool, chic thing that was devoid of any kind of ideological component. And then but it was at least like there was definitely something counterculture. There was magical religion. There was something that was very much naturopathic medicine and like alternative healing was all very much part of this flow of thought. But the people who were trying to organize that and make it into some kind of institutional structure that could survive things like the Satanic Panic, they just got burned out from cat herding, and they were like, we want to do the same thing, but we're gonna just like do it as a party.
Just party. We're just gonna party.
Out from pagan gatherings how to throw a party and how to make it an amazing party. So we're just going to do that part. That was how the local Burning Man stuff got going. It was a bunch of Neo-Pagans who just kind of were like, we're just going to do the party part.
How did you sense? It's like, let's just do a bunch of ecstasy in the middle of the wilderness and set something huge on fire. That's a good time. I don't care where you are.
Close enough, right?
And
so Mark, how did you talked earlier about like, you had that very special interest in Judaism and in your heritage. How did you end up encountering this Neo-Pagan, Wiccan, all these?
So again, it was my mom was into this goddess worship thing.
Okay.
I got into Rocky Horror and science fiction conventions, and there was a group of there were some people there who were part of this group that I eventually, much later, wound up joining, called the Grove of the Unicorn. That was one of a couple of so like in the late 60s, early 70s, there were a couple of people in Atlanta who were very much ahead of their time and really promoting Wicca, like old school British traditional Wicca had come over to America and had started interacting with the goddess worship movement, which really grew out of radical feminism and was coming from completely different origins and expectations. But they bonded over this idea of being witches. So like my mom identified as a witch, but she never identified as Wiccan at all. She had some encounters with Lady Santana, who ran the Church of Ravenwood, which was the other big. So there were these two big groups. And the Church of Ravenwood had a big house in Little Five Points, which was kind of the center of the punk scene and Atlanta counterculture. And they had like a big flop house in Little Five Points, and just like hippies and punks would wander in and crash there. But Ravenwood was very much about being the church of the old religion, and they were very focused on the religious part, and they just did not do magic. It was not part of their tradition, and it was all seen as very, very sketchy, kind of crazy stuff. And then the group that I got involved with was kind of the opposite. They saw the religious stuff as like a useful construct for channeling magical energies, but it was not like, they didn't really necessarily believe in the old gods or in the idea of the Lord and Lady. Was like a useful notion, but not really what they were about. One of the people who started it really like got into this like Reconstructionist temple of Isis, and that was like her foundation was, again, more of a radical feminist basis. And then but people started throwing around Wicca as a term for all of this, and so they were like, well, we'll call ourselves Wiccan because it. But what they were really about was magic and learning how to. And so you hear this definition all the time of magic is it's a Crowley's definition. Magic is the art and science of the will, something about causing change in accordance with will, which is, it's BS from the ground up. First of all, the art and science of causing change in accordance of will is art and science. And second of all, what you actually learn how to do when you're learning to do magic, practicing magic, it's really the art and science of the imagination, and learning how to make the imagination a tool. And it's very easy, unfortunately, to let that get away with you and become a tool of the imagination and fall into magical thinking, which is just like believing that you have some sort of telepathic power over the world and can move objects through the force of your mind.
Yeah, one of those voices in my inner dialogue is God himself, and let me tell you what he thinks.
Purely delusional, and it's also has this much more mainstream manifestation, which is this whole idea of like you can change the world through your vibes, and if you have good vibes and put out good vibes into the world, then positive things will happen to you. And conversely, there's this whole gaslighting element to it. Like if you are having negative things happen in your life, then it's because of your attitude, and it's your fault. It's like this variation on karma, where like whatever socioeconomic oppression you're experiencing is because you were a jerk in a previous life or ate a hamburger or something.
Yeah. When you see a lot of people taking advantage of this now, I mean, that's basically the entirety of what the prosperity gospel is based on.
Exactly. And a lot of what was fueling that rise of like, people think of the craft as being what drove people to. It wasn't. It happened to be there. It was the cool thing that like connected the whole post-punk aesthetic and made it interesting and edgy. But what was really driving it is exactly that. The prosperity gospel is magical thinking.
Yeah, like the craft for magic was like hackers for technology.
Yeah,
like
so Christianity had really driven itself into exactly that. It became a primer for people getting into things like The Secret, and it really, the direction it went in fueled a lot of the growth of these fringe religions that seemed like they were in danger of taking all of the market share of Christianity, until they hit on mega churches and were like, wow, we have a solution.
That's it.
So what kind of things would you guys get into if you weren't leaning into the magical thinking? What would you call yourselves a coven? And if you did, what kind of things would you do?
Well, let's get. Where are we on time? Because I know
we're moving at a good pace.
Okay. So I want to get back to the get back to the stuff in the 80s, because that got.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sort of forecasting some stuff, because I wanted to make the point that there was this process of market forces affecting what was going on, and I learned a lot about that by exploring religion and studying religion, and you know, like, I got a degree in it later, and but like, understanding it from an evolutionary and market forces point of view really completely changed the way that I thought of religions and the nature of religions, and then later I realized that a whole lot of that new understanding also applied to these subcultures, and especially these counterculture fringy groups that were not at all religious, but that had kind of, some of them had very parallel sort of revolutionary or messianic ideas about the transformation. And if you think back to like in the late 80s, early 90s, it was the beginning of this. Like, before that, you go back in the 50s and 60s, and science fiction is all spaceships and you know, colonization of new worlds, and you jump into the 90s and up to today, and it's all post-apocalyptic. Like, where did that dream of a you know, global civilization or an intergalactic civilization, like, how did it go from Star Trek to Fallout? And a lot of it was this same kind of period of disillusionment about the possibilities of alternative economies and countercultures having a real impact on the world, that was driven by, yes, thank you, somebody online, Vivian Westwood. That's exactly the woman whose name I was trying to remember. So it was driven by the media consolidation that was going on. We did not understand that was what was happening to us. I think that when Dragon Con started, we thought it was just going to be another convention, and then it took over. It kept gaining market share. The other conventions kept losing market share. And for a long time, I and a lot of my friends, even though, like, we started Dragon Con, we were the staff for the first many years. We're, you know, the volunteer staff that started Dragon Con were all the members of Terminus Tardis and Dagger and these other BBSs and gaming groups around Atlanta. And like, we really made a collective effort to do this thing, just like we were doing all these other conventions. But the other conventions were very much like, they were focused on the writers and the they were for the theater kids. They were like, you know, they wanted to talk to the best special effects people and the producers and the direct, like, the behind the scenes stuff. How does this work? How do you world build? How do you put together this amazing stuff? How can I learn from you know, Hollywood and the BBC, like, how to write better D&D campaigns? I think there's a lot of but Dragon Con was explicitly a media convention, and that was the thing that made it so big. As media consolidated, it became more and more expensive to get guests, to get those A-list people. And the A-list, you know, what it meant to be A-list in the science fiction and fantasy world in the 1980s was a very different proposition economically from what it meant to be an A-list celebrity today in one of those areas. It was just, the market was so much smaller, and so it was so much more affordable to get guests, and just like what we did.
Yet you would have the same kind of awe for these guests as a nerd that a normal person would have for a big movie star or a rock star.
And now they are big movie stars and rock stars.
Yeah.
But so, you know, I came
what
to
was
find
it
out.
like? What was it like to attend the convention in those first few years, as you could feel that groundswell and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger? What was What was it like to be in the staff for that?
It's hard to say because there was such a diversity of different subcultures and communities and groups, and also because I was pretty young. I was going through puberty through this whole process, and also going through, having gone from this state of extreme alienation and dislocation in society to like really feeling a sense of belonging for the first time in my life, and having a place and a people and and then losing that shortly thereafter as my religious identity became more and more of who I was, and I started to feel again very estranged from those people, because science fiction and fantasy is all fun and games. It's great. It's wonderful. It's wonderful having a sense of community around that stuff, but it's also shallow. And especially given the fact that we were moving into this post-punk era of dissociation from any kind of political or theological significance to any of it. And so, I was really, a lot of what was inspiring me about the whole thing was community building. And so got to bring up Ed Kramer sooner or later. He was at the center of all of this. And he was a genius of community building. It turns out that may have all been in service of building a victim pool for his pedophilic behavior. I don't know how much that is the case, but certainly I know two things. One is that eventually his predilections brought him down and threatened to destroy everything that he had created with Dragon Con. And separating themselves from him became an existential imperative for the convention and for the larger community in some ways. And so he is like either written out of history or only there to be reviled. But he was one of those people who started things and brought things together and had a very intentional sense of community building and that was hugely inspiring to me. And I really, for a long time, until he destroyed my whole world, I looked on to him in so many ways. He was really a mentor in a lot of ways, but or so I thought. In hindsight, maybe he was grooming me. But so there that was also a theme of a lot of the other, subcultures and communities that I've been involved with. Again and again, there have been vampires lurking in the background, and a lot of the time they have been the leaders and the organizers and the ones that don't wind up in jail very quickly tend to be the smart ones. And they get very good at hiding themselves, and they get very good at co-opting things and putting people in this impossible position where they are terrified to ask for help because they might get help, but more likely they're going to see people come in and destroy everything that they've tried to build and say, "See, we were right about you people all along." And
it's like an ethical crisis because you've walked away from the larger society, whether you're in Dragon Con or you're in the Pagan Coven or whatever it might be. And you want to protect that other space you've built that you can get away from all these ills of society, from those kids standing around you in a circle at Woodward or whatever it might be. And you're left with this ethical dilemma. How do I deal with bad actors within my own circle?
Right, exactly. And that was a theme running all through this, that you know, we knew that there were monsters among us. We didn't know about Ed, although I guess some people did, because like one of the first things I heard was, you know, there are rumors about just how creepy is Ed. We don't know. But like, you know, I got to know him, I thought, very well. And I thought, you know, I had set those concerns aside, because I never saw any evidence of it. I think a lot of people felt the same way. But again and again, I saw communities in the Neo-Pagan scene, and there are certainly, you know, there are Hasidic groups, and like I've said for a long time, I don't think that that Catholicism has a special problem with pedophiles in the church. It's not a problem with pedophile priests. It's a problem with accountants, and the fact that, like, even though, you know, the Catholic Church is about as mainstream an institution as you can have, but you know, at the period where all of this stuff was happening, it was having a real crisis of, like, priests were aging out and not being replaced, and there were, because of the hierarchical nature of the institution, there were a lot of roles that could only be filled by priests, and there was just a real lack of suitable managers, and there was a real, again, with market forces, there were these perverse incentives to keep people in place so that they could keep a parish open, or keep a school open, or, you know, maintain control of some important institutional structure that could not be run by the church at all if they didn't have a priest in charge. And so they needed the priest, you know, no matter how screwed up he was, no matter how much baggage it came with, they needed to have somebody in that. And so I think they had a much harder problem getting rid of people than some other denominations that maybe had an easier time.
Right, because some of these churches have a congregational system with deacons. Some of them have a bishopric system where there's like a hierarchy, and both of these things can be used to either hide yourself or to be excused from bad behavior.
And as I learned in studying American church history, that has had a huge impact on the development of democracy and American institutions, and like which of those different ecclesiastical structures and ownership structures and political power structures you adopt has a huge impact, not just on your theology, but on your politics, and on the health of your the society that you build. And the same thing, I think, is true of these fringe communities. But there's in the same way that they have a general lack of institutional understanding of things like pastoral care. So they wind up providing, you know, the parts of the priestly role as a counselor role, but there's a lot of really bad counseling that goes on, and a lot of kind of accidental recapitulation of reparative therapy and other like terrible ideas. The institutional, like there's a lack of understanding of institutional structures and how, you know, what's worked in the past. This is something else I saw really painfully on display in Occupy Wall Street, and why it got taken over by a bunch of heroin dealers, basically. Turned into a 24-hour FTP parade you know, it was co-opted by the people who started it, who had these, you know, ulterior motives that you know, maybe they weren't even really aware of, like, because they also had all of these very punk ideal, you know, anti-establishment utopian dreams, but they didn't understand economies of scale, and they didn't understand that their consensual system, you know, it works great for a garden co-op, but it turns into the tyranny of Narcissus when you get to groups of over about 50.
Yeah.
So I would love it if like some of that Michael Porter strategic management framework could somehow percolate into the understanding of the counterculture.
Yeah, I wish. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, the only way people have been using it is to gamify everything to point of being a cult.
It's not surprising.
Yeah. Guys, we're moving towards the end of the episode, and I want to bring on our producer, Nathan. He's always got some great questions for us, and I'm sure he's been interested in what you've had to say. Nathan, you want to come on the stage with us? Get in here, bud. Yeah,
hello.
Hey, bud.
No, this has been a fascinating conversation, Mark. This is you've covered such a range of things and some interesting points along the way. You definitely given us a lot of great quotes for this episode. I did want to mention that we have a couple comments coming out of Facebook. Lee, I believe Lei, I hope that's pronounced correctly.
Yeah. Hey, Alan.
Okay. Says this underground BBS scene story is interesting. And early on, Lindsay had to say, are y'all talking about the devil worshiping bridge?
See, Lindsay is another old friend of ours. Thank you so much for whatever little bit of listen you gave us, Lindsay. But she would also be a wellspring of the random backwoods,
yes,
rumors and hidden locations of our area. Because I'm not even sure.
Can anybody fill in for me what she might mean by bridge? Because
I don't know what the bridge thing is.
Okay.
If you go on the internet and you look, you can actually find this church we're talking about. Ghost hunter websites will often profile it as a place you might go visit on your day trip in North Georgia, and they call it Hell's Church. So, and when you read them, sorry to interrupt, but when you read the description on it, no mention of any of the story we talked about earlier. So they have forgotten it just as much as we did at the local high school. So sorry, Ian, what were you saying?
I was just saying I'll ask Lindsay about the bridge because I am intrigued. Lee jumped back on, or Alan, and that would be a much better story.
So okay, so
this is devils.
Very out of left field thing. I think that she was just asking about the stuff you guys were talking about before.
She was.
But
yeah.
So a lot of
this, I'm more impressed by the amount of random devil worship, rumored
places.
Items
that might have been lurking around our old hometown.
So Raymond, you mentioned these ghost hunter groups, which so very closely related to that is the urban explorer groups. Probably the most famous of which was this group called the San Francisco Suicide Club, which was a group of urban explorers in San Francisco, which of course, because of the earthquake and there being a whole buried city there, it's a great town for urban explorers.
Wow.
But so I had my cool aunt I mentioned earlier, who was the Buddhist monk, and I had another aunt who was committed suicide when I was about 9 by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, and that was a big thing. So this group of urban explorers named themselves after the fact that people like my aunt were constantly jumping off the bridge because they had their get-togethers on the beach below the bridge. And those get-togethers, those parties, eventually, they got too big for the beach, and so they moved out to the desert, and that became Burning Man.
Interesting. Okay.
The same group of urban explorers, the San Francisco Suicide Club, they were not just partying below the bridge; they were also climbing all over the bridge and climbing all over billboards. And one of their offshoots was the Billboard Liberation Front, which would and they became the group in Toronto that started Occupy Wall Street. In Toronto, Canada, at any rate. I forget if it was Toronto or anyhow.
I've been Vancouver, but again, the Venn diagrams in this episode,
yeah, exactly.
What I'm seeing is okay, yes, you have a special life. Yes, you have a special biography, in that you saw all these subcultures. But man, there must have been all kind of other travelers,
Yes, exactly.
in that era that were, seeing 9 out of 10 and 2 more over here that you didn't see.
I had this family background of generations of bohemian, and also having the privilege of being able to just kind of ignore a lot of the demands that life puts on most people, and just spend my time wandering around absorbing these things and moving through these different groups. So yes, absolutely, it's like my life is atypical in that I've had the opportunity to have a perspective on how much these interesting overlaps are happening all around us. But it's not unusual in that, yes, I think in almost everybody's life, unless they're in a much lower density part of the world where there just aren't many opportunities for overlaps. I think that this stuff is going on all over the place all the time. It's just being in an unusual position to be able to see it and pick up on it and contemplate some of the larger implications of it. So the same group, the San Francisco Suicide Club, a lot of those people were, they were in San Francisco because they had attended Berkeley at the time when the Berkeley Unix distribution was reverse engineering AT&T Unix and laying the groundwork for the open source software movement and building the communities. One of which was the little group of hackers who became included Bill Gates and the Woz and Steve Jobs and so that same community was also building a lot of the early, first the BBSs and then the early internet. So I mentioned the furries earlier. I knew this guy who was the head of I guess the biggest furry thing out there was this this thing called Furry Muck.
Wait, when you say a muck, like a text-based early internet game, mucks, muds, mushes, these sorts of things.
Yeah,
is that a name or an acronym? Is that an acronym or
it's an acronym?
Part is furry, and then muck is. There were all these different text-based. So they're like World of Warcraft or what's the other big one? Elder Scrolls Online, but like all text-based, but big. Massive multiplayer online something dungeon or campaign and so you get these different variations on the acronyms, but so literally, so one of these people who is one of these urban explorers and into these games is trying to work out a metaphor for navigating and draws on their experience as a caver to develop a metaphor for navigating the hierarchy of information systems. And this is how we have the system of folders and subfolders that is the basis of every user operating system that you have ever seen. It is literally drawn from this combination of interests in role play gaming and urban underground exploration.
Yeah, that's right, listeners. If you follow the line of succession of all technology that exists in the world today, it's just nerds all the way down.
Yes. All the way down.
Indeed. So Mark, I feel like you've unwittingly previewed our audience for 2 weeks from now. We're going to have one of the most significant urban explorers in the United States.
Oh, awesome.
On the show. Yeah, Brian Parsival, great filmmaker as well. Can't wait to have him on. We're going to have to wrap it up soon. Nathan or Ian, did you guys have some more questions for Mark before we wrap this up?
I do have real quick. I'm in Pittsburgh, and I must say that the big National Furry Convention has found a home here in Pittsburgh, and they descend on the city annually. But you know, one thing I found fascinating, Mark, was when you were talking about how this evolution of science fiction from, you know, the 50s, 60s, you mentioned Heinlein, you mentioned Asimov, you know, comes to mind, you know, too. And then, you know, there's all spaceships in the future and this future we're going to have. And then, you know, now we're very, very, very post-apocalyptic. If I would say, at least in my lifetime, I've never seen post-apocalyptic as a genre everywhere as strong as it is. But at the same time, I don't know if it's quite in parallel or not, which is what I'd like to ask you. Is you mentioned also you had the hippie scene, which was then change. You know, that evolution there, maybe not less of an evolution, but reaction was the punk scene. So this idea of maybe optimism and then moving towards a reaction to that. Is there a parallel there?
I think there's absolutely a parallel there. I think that it's a major civilizational shift, and I don't know whether it's cyclical. It might be part of some larger. You know, there have been people like Nietzsche who've come along, and then Heidegger, no, Hegel was dialectic. This idea of civilization somehow being a dynamo of the tension between opposites, and like in Nietzsche, he established it in aesthetic terms and talked about the Dionysian and the Apollonian, like the romantic impulse and the classical impulse. So there's this classical impulse that wants to like get us away from nature red of tooth and claw, and it wants to build sewers and, you know, build civilization up. And then there's this romantic notion which like blames the sewers for the fact that the sewers stink, and like winds up, you know, sort of blaming the classical civilizing tendencies for the ills of civilization, for like blaming markets for market failure. And it tries to tear down everything that the classicists have tried to establish, and they sort of go back and forth in this tension and this idealism. And I've been following this at least back to Thomas More and his good friend Erasmus, and the very beginnings of humanitarian counterculture in Europe. So much of which, you know, it goes back to earlier radical Protestant stuff that was driven out by the Lutherans. But
now you're setting up Ian's upcoming segment about the Anabaptists. He's got some of that queued up for us here in a couple of weeks. So you are definitely the right kind of guest.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
Space. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, we're definitely going to be bringing you back again sometime down the line.
Well, good, because I really disappointed at missing out on meeting Audra.
Oh, don't you worry, buddy. Don't you? I think you guys would get along really well. So we're going to have you back on again here real soon, and maybe even some lecture stuff in the future as well with some other projects we're working on. So, Mark, it has just been such a pleasure today talking to you about this.
Thank you very much.
You know,
I've really enjoyed this.
Great. Awesome. All right, Nathan.
Meet you, and good to see you again, Ethan or Ian.
Yeah. No worries. No, I'm like I said, absolute pleasure. We're gonna hang around just a second in the after show to you know.
Okay, I'm out.
Yep, we'll see you in a minute. All right, so you know, you can if you have been watching us live tonight, you know, you can check out the long form video on demand version of this video on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram or wherever in the coming days. Drop us a sub on YouTube. Check out our reels. Ian's been doing just hitting it out of the ballpark with these Facebook shorts, man. Like I would like, you get more views than I would expect with these things. It's been
the algorithm's doing all the work, you know. I'm just, you know, clipping some things together when it's fun.
Here, a little cut there. That's right. That's right. Well, cool. And make sure to check out my Substack. If you want to find the audio only version of the show, you can get a just traditional RSS feed on there and plug it into your iTunes or whatever podcatcher you have. And then you can also go to Audra's Substack. She's not here this week, but man, she's like really a foundation of our show. And she writes some great fiction on her Substack. So if you want to read some of it and contribute to her work as a writer, check her out at Audra's Substack, Raised by Wolfmans. All right, well, that's going to do it for us tonight. I want to just say an extra thank you for Nathan again. Thank you for jumping in and helping us out with some extra questions at the end of the show tonight, and for all your great production work. My name is Raymond Wiley.
I'm Ian.
We'll see you next time.